We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Hey Leo, great to have you on the show. How have you been? How's things?
I'm good, thanks, Sunil. Thanks for having me on.
How's your week been so far? We're coming to the end of the week on this recording. A lot of craziness going on in the UK. How's it been?
Man, you know what? Like, so I've got a Patreon, and so I said to my patrons, here's a list of all the things I want to make videos about this year. And it's all a lot of it's stuff that's been taken over for ages. Like things like the university professors wanting to abolish whiteness. Stuff like that. And then like, I make this list and I never get round to doing any of the videos because stuff is just moving so fast. It's insane. It's like every couple of days there's a new thing. So I've got to I just don't have time to process and write all the stuff that's happening. It's mental.
What's some of the stuff that you've been talking about recently? Like, what's some of the stuff that's been occupying your time?
Yeah, so the Southport attacker I think has been a huge thing because it's really shown. Fun enough, I just mentioned abolish whiteness. I think the establishment is trying to pivot away from the sort of obvious motivation that was expressed by the killer himself. He told his classmates, or he told his football mates that Britain deserves a white genocide. And this is an attitude that is espoused throughout academia, throughout the left. And it's usually couched as decolonization or abolishing whiteness or these sort of cozy woke sounding academic terms. But then we actually see what they look like in reality when you transpose that to real life. We saw woke professors after the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. We saw these professors openly celebrating the attacks, openly celebrating young women being raped and murdered. And people were saying, well, what did you think decolonization meant? And I think that was a moment that a lot of people woke up and were like, oh my god, so this isn't just some dry academic theory. This is actually leading to some pretty horrific real life stuff. And I think with Axel Ruda Cabana, I mean, obviously we can't say for sure, not until we know his full browsing history, not until we know everything for sure. But from what he said and from what his reading material is, he read a lot of stuff that would almost be sort of like it's almost like revenge porn for him, talking about colonialism and white European settlers going to Africa and all the rest of it. And he openly expressed that Britain deserved a white genocide. I think it's revealed that he's motivated by this desire for revenge, collective revenge against white people and white Europeans.
Definitely. And well, how much do you think academia, teachers, lecturers, media are responsible for this? Because it feels like it definitely wasn't a thing when I was growing up. I feel like it's definitely something that's gone a lot worse in the last maybe 10 or so years. But how much responsibility should we be giving these lecturers and teachers who essentially push this?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to really sort of pin collective responsibility onto an individual. I mean, this is something that's happened in our culture. We've seen this cultural shift to sort of uh, almost bashing white people. I mean, I see it in stand-up comedy. I see comedians openly on stage. Anybody, you can just say whatever you like about white people. They can be the butt of the joke. And I understand this because people will think, well, white people are in a position of power, blah blah blah. But we're seeing, in a lot of cases, like those little girls in Southport, they weren't in a position of power at all. The victims of the rape gangs, they're not in a position of power. There's a lot of white people who aren't in a position of power. And I think anything that tries to, foment collective punishment against people is always going to end up, that punishment is going to end up against the powerless people in that demographic group. And I think the big mistake that the left have played over the last few decades is we'd sort of moved, like my generation was the first sort of post-racial, post-racist generation. Like I was brought up, I'm from a mixed race family. I was brought up, even in Scotland I had friends of different colours and stuff, and we're taught judge people based on their personality and the content of their character rather than the colour of their skin. And then the left suddenly, just as sort of things had been sorted like that, the left turned around and were like, no, we got to judge people explicitly on the color of their skin and what demographic they are. And I think that was a terrible a terrible mistake to make, because it's not just led to to violence and rape being excused and ignored and covered up by the establishment. It's also led to like a whole bunch of people rejecting the idea of equality and judging people based on the content of their character, because they tried that and they were told not to.
It's so worrying because, like I think the term like 90s, a lot of people would say colorblind, and I
Yeah.
know that's like really now a bit of a taboo thing, but it kind of made sense, like in principle, of just exactly what you said in terms of just judging people by their merit and not really caring about skin color. It seems now it's you almost have to really ram down everyone's throat your skin color, your ethnicity, where you're from, and blah blah blah, and
Yeah.
it seems very bizarre. Um,
Yeah, it's almost like it's funny seeing comedy clubs, especially the sort of woker comedy clubs, which obviously I don't play too often. But you can see comedians will go up on stage and they walk out there and they're like, "Ah, so I'm whatever, Esmeralda, and I'm half, Paraguayan, whatever, and I'm bisexual, and I'm this and I'm that," and it's like, okay, you're listing things that are, you're not filling in a Arts Council application funding form here. Like, tell us about yourself. Don't tell us like what you were born as. Like, tell us about yourself. But it's weird. People love putting themselves in boxes now, and it's almost like an achievement. People walk out there like, "So I'm bisexual. I'm like transgender." And it's like everybody's like, "Oh wow, wow, you achieved the goal of like licking fanny and sucking dick. What an amazing achievement. Who could do that? You literally climbed Everest. You know what I mean? Like it's not
Crazy.
like it's just something you are. It's not something to be proud of or shunned for. It's just some you are. I don't know why people have to make it a thing, make it an identity now.
Are there any genuinely woke funny comedians? Like, are there funny woke comedians? I can't think of any on top of my head, but is that like, is there like a category for them, and do people actually find
Um,
it funny?
yeah, I mean, like James Acaster, I think is funny, and he's definitely very woke. And I even laugh, I think because comedy, like I think to enjoy comedy, you don't have to completely agree with the person's philosophy. You know, it's their truth, and you just need to see their truth. And the joy of comedy is you can take a completely outrageous position and make fun of it. I mean, I've got a bit in my comedy where I talk about the grooming gangs and I say, they're coming over here. People used to say they're coming over here taking our jobs. It's like, no, they're coming over here taking our pedophilia. And, so it's from the point of view of like, somebody getting angry about that. And obviously you know, it's not a serious position
Yeah.
to take, but yeah, and I think James Acaster, takes some positions I disagree with, but he's really funny. Also, Stuart Lee. I mean, Stuart Lee, I don't think he's a good guy. I don't agree with anything he says, but I do laugh a lot when I watch his comedy.
Can you have that kind of like, do you do that as a comedian yourself where you have your own maybe personal views and then you kind of just you go on stage and not you put on an act, but like they say musicians separate the man from the artist kind of thing. Is that easy to do? Is that possible?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, like if comedians were, if I was actually the person I am on stage, I'd be in jail. You know what I mean? It's like if you look at comedians like Bill Burr, you can feel. I mean, the thing is, it sort of straddles the line between being an act, but also there's a kernel of truth in there, and there's something you can recognize and identify with, and it's sometimes it's like you know the darkest thoughts that you dare not say yourself in polite society. But comedians have always had that. The court jester always had that. He was the only one. He was the only guy who could criticize the king, who could mock the sort of the airs and graces of the court. And I think it's the same now.
Do you think like do you think we've gone past that peak cancellation period? I do want to definitely talk about what happened in Australia with your show. Do you think
Yeah.
we're past that before we go there? Do you think we're past that worst moment of wokeism?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think it's almost like I think there's almost a rush to the other side now, and you can see
Yeah.
a lot of comedians. I think there's going to be a lot of comedians who weren't unwoke and who did play. I mean, if you look at Frankie Boyle, he was incredibly unwoke 20 years ago. He was saying horrific things, doing rape jokes about disabled kids and stuff. You know what I mean? And then he went incredibly woke because he wanted to protect his career and he wanted to surround himself with the sort of the modish um, comedians of the day, the Sophie Dukers and stuff. So it was almost like protection for him. I wouldn't be surprised if Frankie Boyle, now that he smells the water's shifted. If he goes back to doing rape jokes about disabled kids,
Well, okay. Well, and there's a slight cut there. You're saying about Frankie Moore going back to making sort of those rape jokes. Do you think he'll go back to that?
yeah, and I think a lot of people are going to come into my space,
Right.
my space that I suffered to inhabit, and they're going to colonize. They're going to colonize right wing comedy.
There's not really, during like COVID, I felt like that changed. Like there wasn't much like comedic stuff like was going on. Obviously, it's really hard for you guys because you can't go and do it in shows. But there were a few
Yeah,
Americans that I thought really entered that kind of maybe like the right wing space or whatever, like Theo Von, and they would say pretty
yeah,
outrageous stuff. And I really, again, it was amazing to. I didn't think that kind of person could ever exist in comedy and be
yeah.
for it to be okay. But he seems to have done really well in the right wing space. In UK, is it hard being a right wing comedian?
It's definitely way harder than in America. I mean, Theo Von, their biggest comedians are all pretty right wing. I mean, if you look at Andrew Schultz, Theo Von, who was the guy? Who's the guy who's doing jokes at the about Puerto Ricans? All these
Oh,
guys,
yeah.
all these guys are huge and like doing huge stadiums and arenas and stuff. Man, a couple of years ago, a touring company. I probably shouldn't mention their name because they've been good to me in the past, but they came to me and they said we want to do a tour with you. So are you up for it? And I was like, yeah, brilliant, let's do it. So they're gonna just book me into all the venues that they put tours on it.
Right.
And like a big portion of the venues came back and said, we can't have him on. He's problematic. He's transphobic. He's all the rest of it.
Wow.
Which I am, but I think it's funny. I think it's funny to be all those things. So the tour never happened. So the comedians in the UK who would be the Theo Vons, who would be the Bill Burrs or whatever, don't even get a chance. Man, we don't even get to and people can say, oh, but you haven't been cancelled from everywhere. You could put your own tour with this. That's not the point. A big touring company wants to just be able to program you in, slot you in. They don't want to deal with like days and days of admin trying to like find little venues that'll put you on, and then you get there and it's all set up wrong and stuff. They just want to do it the way they do it. It's an industry, you know what I mean? So and also they don't want the blowback. They don't want tours getting cancelled at the last moment because people are phoning up complaining. They don't want other acts saying, well, I'm building my tour because this guy's on. So they play it safe and they don't put it on. Whereas in America, there's much more of a sort of free speech. People. I think if you pulled shows or if people complain, they're sort of seen as like, oh, why are you being such a dick? You know what I mean? Whereas here it's like, oh, they complained, we must pull everything. I don't know why people give such power to these moaning assholes over here. But yeah, that's why British comedy is so shit. Man, we don't even get a chance. So now I don't even really do much stand up comedy anymore. I've just pivoted away to political commentary and stuff like that. Places where I could say the things I want to say, and places where I'm allowed to be funny. You know what I mean? I'm allowed to be funnier being a political commentator than I am as a comedian.
It's so true because I can't. I think now my comedy pretty much comes from America. Like Theo Von, Andrew Schultz, two names you mentioned. I listen to them all the
Yeah,
time. I listen to their podcasts, all their stuff, and that's where I get my. I don't get any really like when Ricky Gervais does something, then from Ricky Gervais, but like there's not doesn't seem to be. I don't know. We had James Dreyfus on the show recently, and
oh
we
yeah,
both were saying about how the arts in general, comedy and stuff, is really in like kind of decline in Britain, and wokeism's really destroyed it in like so many ways. Um, let's talk about Australia because that was obviously quite big news at the time, happened in 2019.
yeah.
Maybe for people who don't know, if you just give a breakdown of what was going to happen and what in the end didn't happen.
Yeah, so basically, I had this show called Right Wing Comedian, and I was taking it to the Perth Fringe in Australia, and I can't remember if I took it to other festivals down there as well, but I think I did. I think I took it. Yeah, I took it to Adelaide, and I might have taken it to Melbourne as well. But basically, comedy's very inclusive and tolerant. Apart from if somebody's right wing, then that person's got to get cancelled. They've got to have the complete their village razed to the ground. But they saw that somebody was doing a show called Right Wing comedian, so they went through my Twitter to like find something to cancel me for. And I hate it when people do this. They go back years and find, something they said in 2012 or whatever, and it's like, oh, now Kevin Hart can't host the Oscars, because he said something vaguely homophobic 10 years ago. They're like offense archaeologists, like digging up the sins of the past. So they went on my Twitter and they went all the way back to that afternoon. It was literally the most recent thing I'd posted. It's kind of lucky they didn't go back to 2012 because it would probably be much worse. But yeah, it was a bit of material from my show, and in my show I was talking about the differences between transitioning. I was talking about how hard it is for men to transition to being a woman compared to women trans. Like if a woman wants to transition to being a man, a lot of cases she just stops shaving. You know what I mean? She'll grow a beard. People will be like, "I think that man's got tits." Like if I want to transition to being a woman, it's a totally different story. I've got to like get fake boobs, got to have a whole new wardrobe of clothes, got to shave down my brow bone, shave down my jawbone, got to have all this surgery, got to learn to walk in high heels, got to, learn to talk in a high pitched voice, got to grow my hair long, all the rest of it, disguise my male pattern baldness, which I'm actually doing a good job of right now. And at the end of all that expense and effort, people are just going to look at me and go, I think that man's got tits. Like it's a totally different story. And it's like, it's much, the joke's not transphobic. It's about the differing beauty standards between men and women. Like, a woman can just, look like a man can be shrubby, whereas a woman's got to be like, a woman. So it's not having to go. Also, I wrote that material with a transgender woman that I was dating at the time, because I'm actually woker than that. And this was like before. This is before it was all like cool. This is like back in the day. I remember people who are woke were actually mocking me for dating a transgender woman, because that was back when dating transgender women was seen as questionable by the Guardian readers and stuff.
Right.
Then it all changed when they downloaded the new programming that said it's actually the only acceptable form of dating. But yeah, we didn't write it, aiming to be transphobic or whatever. But yeah, I didn't get any sort of right to reply. My venue was just like, they literally said to me, "This is an inclusive space. You have to leave." And
Wow.
like, that's not what inclusive means. You know what I mean? Like, if it's an inclusive space, I get to stay. But yeah, my show got pulled. And this is the thing, man. If Ricky Gervais, if he gets cancelled, it's publicity for him. You know what I mean? He's not getting cancelled because he's shifting so many tickets.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to put his show on because they want to make millions of pounds. With me, man, somebody's making like a few £100. Like, I'm making a few £100 off my show. Somebody else is making a few £100. They're not that bothered. You know what I mean? So if you're getting like 150 people through the door, you can cancel that person. And it was a real pain. It cost me like $3,500 to get a new venue, new materials, and all the rest of it sorted out. And yeah, it was a real pain. And also, man, it just sort of it sends a message to other people in the industry, like, oh, these are the topics you shouldn't talk about. If you talk about it, just follow the sort of acceptable, ordained guidance for that topic.
Well, I think that's the worrying thing, like you say, because it's okay when you're Ricky Gervais, because they've already kind of made it now, and Theo Von
Yeah,
these guys, but it must discourage anyone, either young comedians or up and coming ones, or ones who are doing reason. You must be so like scared to basically almost rewrite all your material. I don't know what else you would do on
yeah.
a practical basis.
Yeah, and if you look at what what it's done to the UK comedy industry. I mean, look at Live at the Apollo. Look at the lineups for the past going back years and years. They're like, I mean, you get a few good guys on there, but mostly just complete dog shit. You know what I mean? Like literal like dog shit, open mic level dog shit. But like they can come out there and be like, "Hey, I've got this identity and this identity," and everybody claps. You know what I mean? But man, it's choking. Like comedy's got to be a meritocracy, because even more than like other industries, you can really see it with comedy. If you're not making people laugh, if you're not crushing on stage, man, you're dying in your hole. There's nowhere to hide. You can't really tell if modern art is good or not, because it's like it looks like shit anyway.
Yeah.
You can tell if a comedian's good or not.
What's like the audience like now when you've done your shows in the past, or just generally, are they a lot more sensitive? Like, are you a bit more worried when you're doing your material, or you just go for it?
Really depends where I am. I mean, most of the shows I do now, I've got a couple of shows coming up on the 4th and the 11th of February with Francis Foster. Just get that little plug in.
Okay,
But that's a show like I'm going to do an hour. Francis is going to do an hour. People are coming specifically to see us, so that's a whole different ball game from like just doing a random comedy club. When people are coming specifically to see you, you've got a lot more leeway
right.
to say and do what you want because people have already bought into they've researched you and they know what they're coming to see. Um, but yeah, what I find is, I mean, I still do occasionally do regular comedy clubs, and people are kind of on board with some pretty wild stuff. Like it's not, the actual punters sitting in the seats are on board with it. The promoter might get a bit worried sometimes, but yeah, people really want something that's a bit different and something that's kind of thought provoking and is funny instead of just trotting out the same old like hack shite. And there's been a big push for sort of diversity and inclusion in the comedy industry. And to be honest, it was needed. Like the Comedy Store back like 10, 15 years ago, man, you go there and you just see like four bald middle-aged guys come out and do like and talk about the same topics. I remember seeing like act after act come out, bald middle-aged white guy, and talk about how his jizz didn't come out very hard anymore. So we needed some diversity. Like I run a night called Hating Live with my mate Darius Davies. We always book a woman on it because it gives the women somebody to cheer for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a need for diversity, but when the diversity thing, the mantra takes over, and they're given the slots based purely on identity rather than who's funniest, it's just dog shit. Like my mate Nico Yearwood, he's from Barbados. He's like authentically ethnic and all the rest of it. Absolute killer, one of the funniest guys in the UK, and he hasn't been given live at the Apollo, and it's because they're not looking at the best. They're just looking at who's gonna like when you're ticking boxes, you're not getting the best person for that box, if you know what I mean.
I think you can say about almost anything as well, not even just comedy, almost everything. I saw a thing, I don't know if you saw Oxford and Cambridge now have done this thing where they're going to change it and make it easier for non-white people to go to university. But I'm pretty certain, I haven't got the stat off my head, but like Asians in the UK are the ones who are most likely by
Yeah,
percentage to go to university anyway, so it
yeah, yeah, yeah.
makes no sense.
It's so weird. I don't think it'll be for Asians though. I think it's going to be for other ethnic minorities. Because what they found in America, they had the same thing. They had affirmative action. I think it's been rolled back now. I think the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional, or whatever. But they had this affirmative action for the universities that achieved more of a sort of a balance of a more representative balance of ethnicities and stuff. But it actually discriminated against Asians. It discriminated against Asians because they were getting held back the most. They were getting held back more than white people because they were overachieving. So I mean, as a white guy, it's great to sit back and see somebody else complaining. Wait a minute, this anti-racist stuff is bad for me.
Well, it's just it's crazy. I don't I think the academia stuff is wild, and if people did actually
Yeah.
care, I think we said quite a lot on this show where the group of people who are doing the worst in schools, like even on proportion, is white boys. Like they are
Yeah.
doing so bad. Like there's numeracy rate and literacy rate, so it's going declining so much. So if anyone actually, if they did really care, they would probably think about that, and maybe if they stopped making white boys feel so guilty about stuff that happened over 100 years ago, maybe that would help their confidence and all this sort of stuff. So I think it's really, really, I think if they actually cared and wanted to make a conscious effort, that would probably be
Yeah.
the target market.
Yeah, it's like that thing. I mean, if you're leveraging collective punishment against a group, it's always going to be the weakest and the most vulnerable in that group who actually suffer the collective punishment. So yeah, the working class white boys are suffering that, whereas the rich white guys aren't. They're the ones people are trying to leverage the punishment against. It's so dumb. Also, this if you make the exams easier for certain ethnic groups, anybody from those ethnic groups is going to have a question mark over their ability
Yeah.
hanging over them the rest of their lives, which is such a horrible, toxic thing to do to that ethnic group. It's increasing the amount of prejudice and racism rather than decreasing it.
I think it's so degrading as well. Like it's just it's almost it's racist to white people and it's just
Yeah.
degrading to non-white people because
Mm.
like it's just like your first thing would be my first thing would be, well, am I not good enough like against a normal per like against any skin color? I need a hand. I'd be like offended. It'd be very. bizarre. But it seems, I think what you said, I think it's probably the more the rich white middle class, upper class, those white liberals who are just, I think they have no purpose in their life other than to just, this is their newfound purpose is just to push this sort of.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If you're going to make these roles, there's been so many roles created that are like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and so those people need to make work for themselves
Yeah.
by saying, "Oh no, we got to make the exams, change the exams like this. So they're easier for ethnic minorities." We need to just abolish all those roles, all of those roles. Abolish those people as well, man. Like anybody who worked in diversity. If you worked in diversity, that tells me like two things. Number one, you're a disgusting communist, and number two, you're going to be useless at anything else. So probably the best use for you right now is to turn you into dog food.
I mean, so what's happened like with yourself in terms of comedy? Because like obviously you said that you're doing more like news presenting and more this sort of stuff. Like, do you see yourself coming back to comedy at any point? Do you like what where that becomes the main focus? Do you just think the UK market is so dire right now for comedy that there's just no interest?
Well, funnily enough, I did Comedy Unleashed like last week, and man, it was such a buzz. Like I did new material about like grooming gangs, Islamophobia, and all this stuff I'd been wanting to talk about, and it was such a total buzz. Yeah, like that's something you don't get from any other job, you know what I mean? That's why people do comedy. Like I did comedy for so long, for like, for not much. Like if I wanted money, I'd have stayed. I was a management consultant, I worked in intelligence, all this sort of stuff. Like I made more money doing that than I did in comedy, but I got way more of a buzz out of comedy. The thing that changes as well, is like I had a kid, and as soon as you have a kid, you don't want to be traveling, you don't want to be away overnight, staying in hotels and stuff. So it sort of stops you wanting to do, or for me anyway, it stopped me wanting to do comedy. I just want to come home and play with my kid. Like I made cupcakes with my kid today, and it was just like the funnest thing. And like so, so I'm getting that buzz I got from comedy, but from making cupcakes.
Is that changing your material and stuff? Having a kid, like has that made like no, I don't wanna say dad jokes, but has it just kind of changed your like that whole
No,
process?
hasn't changed my my material on stage. In fact, if anything, it's made me think more about the world, and made me more concerned about leaving the world in a better state for my kids.
Right.
Um, and I think that's a lot of people. I know Rupert Lowe in Reform. He's motivated by that as well. He wants to leave the world a better place. And I think a lot of people on the left want to leave the world a better place. I think they've just misguided in how to go about it. I think we need to preserve our institutions and our freedoms and our traditions, and not institute some sort of shitty communism.
Do you see yourself in politics going forward in the future at any point? Do you think that could be something that you see yourself doing? Because obviously you're doing more of the GB News stuff, you're another, you're doing a lot of the news content and stuff, and you've been in politics before. Do you think that could be an avenue in the future?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'd love to, and I think obviously if you want to actually affect change, then being in politics is probably second only to owning a social media platform or running an NGO if you want to have change real things on the ground. Um, yeah, I'd love to go back into it. I mean, the trouble is, here's Lewis Schaefer. There's Lewis Schaefer. Keys. The trouble is, the trouble is, uh, like politics is tough. It's very sort of financially unrewarding. Um, it's you're opening yourself up to a lot of barbs and slingshots and stuff. Um, so yeah, would I want to put my family through it? And also, like, I mean, it's not like I had an amazing track record. I got like 0.3% of the vote or something. The only thing is, I wasn't really trying. I was actually worried. I remember, like, because I ran for Reclaim in Glasgow.
Right.
Before I ran for Reclaim, George Galloway actually phoned me up. He wanted me to run for his party. All under one? It's basically a sort of getting the anti-SNP vote together. So he had some
Right.
party doing that, and I was all like, I said to him like, what if I get in? I'm worried I'm gonna have to do loads of work. And he said like, listen, Leo, don't worry. The only work you do is getting elected. After that, you can just piss about. And it was reassuring to hear a politician be so candid about it. But now I think, man, like Trump is really inspirational. Javier Milei is really inspirational. And you can see, like, if we got the right people in, we could have transformational politics and really change a lot of the things that a lot of the structural issues with Britain, a lot of the long-term policies that have really sort of been destroying Britain and destroying what it is to be British. And we could wipe that out and have create a Britain that's really prosperous and business minded and is going to be a strong nation going forward. Um, but I don't know. Then again, British people ready for optimism?
Mm.
It's not really an optimistic country.
I mean, Trump, I think what Trump's done in these 7 days, less than a week, is just crazy. Like, because we're always
Mm,
told how hard it is to change the system, how long it takes, and how it's a process and difficult. He's done so much in 7 days, which is just, he's put this Labour government, previous Tory governments to shame in what he's done in 7 days.
yeah,
It's really remarkable and makes you wonder, he had 4 years out and 4 years to try and prep this. Labour
yeah,
had more than what 15, 16 years, and
yeah.
it's crazy. It's
Yeah, I mean, I guess the trouble with Labour is like anything they'd want to do, the Tories already did. I mean,
it's
the
true.
Tories were effectively a Labour government. I mean, if you wanted to look at somebody who's like really had a transformational impact in British politics and in the civil service, it'd be Tony Blair. And when he got in, he knew exactly what to do, who to replace to actually affect change and get people in the civil service to do what he wanted to do. When the Tories got in, they didn't seem bothered. They didn't do the same thing. They didn't do a root and branch, restructuring to make sure they had control over it. They didn't. They just wanted to be figureheads, and it's a real shame. And so much what the Tories did was just, it was almost they were just like the sort of the poster on the wall while the civil service were going about doing what they were going to do anyway. When we talk about the woke blob, man, like the Tories didn't even make an attempt to wrestle the woke blob into the ground. We really need somebody who's going to come in like Millet style and just, man, I used to work in the public sector. That's what turned me right wing. We need somebody to come in and just slash and burn the public sector. Because for all that the industry says, oh, we need infinite immigration, we need open borders because we've got all these jobs that we need people to fill. It's like the people to do those jobs are already here. They're just working in councils and in NGOs and in charities and in other unproductive roles.
I don't understand this immigration stuff. We've got so many Brits in this country that are not working. I don't think there's a
Yeah,
whole massive problem even with some of the mental health sickness. Like, obviously there are people with genuine mental health issues and they do need help, but I think we've kind of maybe not gone too far, but I think we don't necessarily understand the difference between mental health and mental well-being. A lot of people have
yeah.
mental well-being issues, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have mental health, if that sort of makes sense. So I think we've just gone a bit too far, and there's so many people who have with that mental health tag who are basically at home when they should be
Yeah.
working.
Absolutely. Like you're supposed to be depressed. This is Britain. Who's happy in Britain? If you're happy, I'd want you locked up. Like look at the weather. Look at your tiny shitty little cars and your tiny shitty little houses. Look at the dismal high street. You're supposed to be depressed, and people are complaining about it. I don't know. I think the immigration thing that you mentioned, it's really changed. I think we had a big change in immigration from like my uncle is Indian and he came over in like I think it was the late 60s, early 70s,
Right.
and man, he loves Britain. He's really like buys into Britain. He's really involved in the community. He's a great guy, really smart guy. He's when people talk about high value immigration, he's like the perfect example. You know what I mean? He's kept his aspects of his culture, but he sees himself as British.
Right.
And then if you look at people that are coming across now that haven't filled in a form, haven't stood in a queue, haven't applied, haven't followed correct routes or whatever, they just get on some that floats and they come here, or they do some sort of student visa scam or whatever. Man, it's not the same. And I think people thought the first waves of immigration were successful, so they're like, well, we can just open the floodgates and it'll be the same. But it's not the same.
I think that's a really good point. I spoke once with Winston Marshall actually, and we talked about the different types of immigration. I think that wave, 60s, 70s, and 80s, came
Yeah,
when A, there was a genuine labor shortage, so we needed workers as a country. B, I think the people who came here genuinely really wanted to be part of Britain. They saw the value of
yeah,
Britain. They loved the British culture. They saw maybe what how their life wasn't so good in their previous country. Now this is a better version of their life. It seems now this bizarre wave, which is we're bringing in people who actually hate Britain and like who hate
yeah,
British culture. So it just makes no sense that there are
yeah,
people who we bring to this country who genuinely have no interest in adopting anything in Britain and actually hate Britain. And but
yeah,
we're welcoming them in. It's bizarre.
yeah. So weird.
What's so going back to sort of the comedy news presenting, what are the next things for you? Like what would you think like going forward will be your next avenues? Would you think you'll just carry on with the news presenting? Would you with the sort of more comedic approach, or just kind of see what happens between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I've been quietly building up my YouTube channel and writing a lot as well. So, like my YouTube channel's on like 136,000 subscribers now, and I put videos up there all the time. Just sort of they're scripted monologues essentially. So they're like essays that you don't have to read because a Scottish guy is shouting them instead.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to continue with that because it lets me work ideas out. Um, and I'm also like looking to America. A lot of the people I know are moving to America. I'd like to move to America, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, I see myself as British. I know a lot of people see themselves as sort of internationalists. And like back when I was performing comedy, I was traveling so much. You know, I don't really see myself as British. As soon as you have a kid and you sort of you stop, I think you become more like I see myself as more of a Londoner now. So I really want Britain to succeed, and I'd love to. To be honest, I'd love to stay in Britain. I'd love Britain to fix its problems, especially if climate change makes it warmer. Then Britain would be the ideal country.
Do you have any optimism for Britain now? Like is there anything that makes you feel optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look, historically, when you have a sort of pretty far left government that comes in and wrecks things, and you have financial crises and all the rest of it, which I think we've got an impending financial crash coming because we can't fund public sector pensions, we can't fund the state pension. That needs to we really do need to increase the retirement age, and that's that's a sort of structural imbalance that's got to cave in at some point, and I think it's going to cave in the next sort of 5 years. It's going to cave in during this Labour government, and then that'll be the catalyst for a new Javier Malay style government to come in and sweep away everything. The only thing that might stop it is the fact that British people really don't like. We've always been a country of moderation, so we don't like radical change, but we could at least have a Thatcher. It's interesting now. Like if I was in the Falkland Islands, I'd be like, man, I hope Argentina invades. Like I'd rather be living under Malay with his ideas than living under the socialist. Starmer is a lot more like the Peronists.
Yeah, I mean, what is yeah, you've obviously identified as a right-wing comedian quite early on, it seems, in your career. What
Yeah.
made you come out and do that? Like, because obviously there's obviously been a political influence somewhere along the line. What made you come out and say you're a right-wing comedian when sometimes a lot of probably comedians don't really say what their beliefs are, but you can kind of work it out. But what made you make that statement from the kind of start?
Yeah, I mean, people started calling me a right wing comedian, and also I realized, if I call a show right wing comedian or I can make you Tory, then it would people would know what the show was about, and it becomes almost a marketing tool. And it also gave me an angle to write about as well, and to get these ideas out because there's so much stuff I was writing about that I really sort of passionately believed in, and I wanted to. I used to do material about how nuclear power was good and stuff, and yeah, like it really, and obviously reading about socialism, the history of socialism. I don't think people in this country like there wasn't any sort of like people were aware that the Nazis were bad, but people thought, oh, the Soviet Union, no, they were pretty good guys. They, they helped us win the war and stuff. And it's like, whoa, they like, communism killed like tens of millions of people. It's like it's a horrific thing. So any step towards communism, and to be honest, the Nazis were essentially communists. They weren't libertarian conservatives. They were very authoritarian, very big state. So any step towards any increasing of the size of the state is a step towards authoritarianism and a step towards the horrors of the Soviet Union. So yeah, really, it doesn't sound like fun stuff for comedy, but that's what I was writing about.
I think, going on like with communism and all that stuff, one things with Keir Starmer, I'll be honest, I got completely wrong. I didn't see him as much of a lefty as he clearly is. I always thought he'd
Yeah,
be bad for Britain and be in the definitely the wrong direction. But I actually now completely changed and said this is somebody who actually is like a far left, yes, serious left wing, maybe just as much as Corbyn, which I think I got completely wrong. I didn't see that in him at all.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had sort of high hopes for Starmer because he sold himself as somebody who was going to end the chaos. And also, all the stuff he was saying, he sort of sounded like the best leader the Conservatives ever had. You know what I mean? He was like, I'm gonna do all this. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna enforce border control and stuff. And he didn't do any of it. And then, after the Southport riots, he came out and just called anybody who was angry about these girls getting stabbed. He called them, far right thugs. And I thought, well, man, that's disgusting. You took the knee for BLM, so you yourself, you took the knee for what a criminal who died in America because he was full of drugs and because somebody kneeled on him. So you took the knee for that, but you won't accept that people are angry about these girls getting stabbed, and you think anybody who is angry is just exploiting it for far right propaganda purposes. I mean, that's an absolutely sick and cynical thing to say, and he completely lost me, and I think he lost a lot of the country at that point.
I don't think there's any after that any real going back, and I think what I'm just almost so grateful for, and it sounds like you probably are as well, is for Elon Musk on
Yeah.
X on Twitter. I think what he's done is just he's probably been the best UK like opposition this last 6 He's been incredible.
Yeah.
What he's done is just absolutely incredible. What's it like now for you on X in comparison to Twitter maybe a few years ago? Do you feel like more comfortable to um, I think there's two parts to it because obviously now the UK law are enforcing on a lot more on social media posts.
Mm.
So does that concern you more? Like, are you a bit more scared to post maybe the stuff you post now compared to maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of disgusting the Keir Starmer, even the and all the sort of the talk about the Southport attacks and stuff. He's shied away from blaming the obvious that this guy shouted for a white genocide, and instead he's directing it towards oh, knife sales. He's directing it towards uh, online material that's violent or whatever. And it's like, man, there's a lot of people view online material that's violent. It doesn't make them go out and commit atrocities. So Starmer and Labour are being quite cynical in that they're exploiting it to bring through to rush through controls for the internet that'll criminalize basically what they consider to be the far right, which in a lot of cases is just people who are concerned about their country. Um, and that's another thing that's really disgusting about by Starmer is the fact that he'll exploit instance like that to sort of push forward his own agenda. But yeah, I think the Online Safety Act, it's going to be enforced at some point. I think it's unenforceable, and I think it's idiotic, and it makes the internet in Britain more censored than in China. Um, and yeah, it's really going to restrict what people can say or do. I mean, that's the idea anyway. Realistically, I don't think it'll work. I think there'll be a big backlash against it, and it can't be implemented. A lot of legislation gets rolled back, like the Named Persons Act in Scotland. Or the sectarian. In Scotland, they brought through this act to stop people singing sectarian chants in football matches. And obviously that's unworkable. What, you're going to stop? You're going to stop 50,000 people singing a song? Like, how are you going to do that? So that had to be rolled back. You're going to stop people tweeting their opinion on Twitter. that's going to be impossible. But yeah, going on Twitter now, I remember like before Musk took it over, talking about the issues that I wanted to talk about was like it was like a Chinese person trying to talk about Tiananmen Square. You know what I mean? You had to do it in a way that wouldn't get you kicked off Twitter. And now I think it's great. People say, "Oh, there's so many mean people on Twitter saying horrible things." It's like, no, I don't think there are. I mean, people say mean things to me. I just ignore it, block them, whatever. Then you go on Blue Sky and people are saying, "Oh, TERFs should be hung and burned and all this," and it's like, "Well, oh, this is the nice people, is it?"
I think Blue Skies, like I've heard so many people like joke about it on Twitter. They've nicknamed it like Blue Cry or something. Like that's the new nickname. It's really I love Twitter now. X whatever. Like I love it. It's just so much more. Not the Wild West, but it's just so much more interesting. I see so many like radical left wing stuff on there and more on the right side, and I love it. I think that's how it should be. Like you should be seeing just people just arguing about it. I am worried though with the law in terms of even like making jokes and stuff on X
Mm.
and stuff like it. I thought of making a joke the other day. It was when the Labour MP who was the video got released of him beating up that resident,
Yeah,
and I was
yeah.
doing like a joke about like you have to. This is what happens if you tweet bad about Sir Keir Starmer or something. And then I thought to myself, oh wait a minute, like could this get me in trouble? Like because I'm like it.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. It's just that's my kind of concern, and it's kind of what we were talking about from the start of this show in terms of with comedy and like the I just find it really I'd be really worried if you're a young comedian now or up and coming, like what content can you feel okay to write about in the UK?
Yeah, and also the stuff like the Hate Crime Act in Scotland, which specifically sort of targets stage performances and says, they could be criminal. Or conversations in your own home could be criminal as well. If you take a joke and read it out in court, if you have a stern middle-aged woman reading any of my jokes out in court, they're going to sound like hate crimes. You know what I mean? But when I say them on stage, it's funny and people are laughing. The comedy doesn't need to be policed because we already have a jury in front of us. There's the audience. If the audience don't laugh, if the audience find it objectionable, they decide. It doesn't. We don't need outside people coming in. Man, I did a gig in Glasgow. It might have been the last gig I did in Glasgow for Comedy Unleashed. This is going back a couple of years, and they had the venue would only let it go ahead if they had stewards at the side of the stage making sure that we didn't say anything too horrific, too controversial, commit a hate crime or whatever. Which is like it's like when Lenny Bruce was performing in the '60s and they had the cops there ready to storm the stage when he swore or whatever. It's
Crazy.
mental.
But
And like the democratization and the sort of decentralization of information is just such a positive thing. Back in medieval times or whatever, we had the central, the bishop or whatever would decide what's true, what's not. And then when we had newspapers and television, we had this big burst of information and everybody could find out what's going on in the world. And then with social media, people could have open source discussions and people just decide, people just arguing things out amongst themselves, which is even better. People might get things wrong, but overall, you're going to get, even when people say the wrong thing, quite often they're reflective of or hinting at something that's true. So I think you can't shut down stuff for being wrong or for being angry or whatever. And now we seem to be rolling it back. We're going back to the idea that there's a central bishop that can decide, what's correct and what the proper opinion is, and whether the sun goes around the earth or the earth goes around the sun.
it's really troubling times, and like it's what I love about what you do, and like even like with music in some ways it is those intrusive thoughts that you're never going to act on, but it's nice to hear back. And I remember a few years ago, I don't know if it ever got passed, but in America they were looking to put through a bill where essentially what you say on songs you can't get you can't use that in court, so you can't use there's a famous artist at the time, I can't remember, and it's you probably shouldn't laugh by it, but the song was called "Murder on My Mind," and he actually ended up murdering somebody. So like they tried to put forward a bill to basically say, and although that's probably an extreme example, I like the idea
Yeah.
of that you can create have that kind of keep the arts people keep them allow them to have that freedom of expression because I think once you
Yeah, I mean the trouble with that is if you do go and murder someone.
yes
Like if I was going out and doing comedy about murdering people, fine. If I then go and murder someone, that's then maybe we should take that comedy into account.
Well, it's been amazing to have you, Lee. I'm conscious that you're just about to go on a show shortly. We have like a closing thing that we do on this show, which is basically for I ask the guests what is an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be a popular opinion. So it can be anything, it could be something that we discussed, it could be trivial,
Oh
it could
man.
be absolutely anything. But first thing that comes to your mind, what you think is a an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular.
You know what? I was just thinking about this today. So, the pickup artist movement. So there's guys like training, they had companies training guys how to sort of, talk to women. And not just
Okay,
companies. I mean,
okay,
there was just like forums and stuff like talking, teaching guys, go out, approach women in the bar or in the street, ask, talk to them, be nice, ask for the number, blah blah blah, make jokes. These are the steps and the structures you need to sort of essentially in the end get girlfriend or get pussy. So it was slammed as exploitative and horrible and all that sort of stuff. I was involved. I was part of it. I learned some of the stuff. I read The Game, this book that was sort of a pivotal book for it. And I'm telling you, 99% of those guys were just sort of socially awkward guys who wanted to be, socially calibrated and get a girlfriend. It wasn't, guys going out trying to exploit, trying to get like, sleep with 30 women a week or whatever. Most of the guys just wanted a girlfriend or just some pussy, you know. And now we've got this, and the media, the establishment came out and said, "Oh, this is disgusting, this is terrible, exploitative, whatever." Now we've got a problem with guys that don't speak to women at all,
great.
don't ever learn to socialize like that. And I think the pickup artist movement was doing that, was actually filling that gap that was left by the breakdown of social structures that we used to all mix together and talk to each other and find our wives and girlfriends. And I think it's just such a shame, man. Overall, it was such a positive movement, and it was so defamed, and it was doing a real social problem. It's like fixing a real social problem, and it's like the unintended consequences. Like people never thought through. Oh, if we take away this, how are men gonna, you know,
Well,
become
you're completely right
become
because all the stats will support more men are single now than ever before. They're having less
yeah,
sex. Everything supports that. So I think that's a really good
yeah.
one.
So yeah, so if you're out there, you're listening, and you're not getting any pussy, no, you're not. Basically, man, study that. All this stuff is probably still online. I'm even in some of the training materials. I'm in this video game called Super Seducer 2.
Okay.
So you can not
We
that
might put that in the
I've
link.
got to be honest with that would not be my first port of call if you wanted to learn about
We'll put the link of this in the bio.
it.
Well, thank you so much, Leo. Like it's been amazing to have you on. I know you're going to the show in literally a
Yeah.
couple minutes. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Sunil. Good talking to you.